Imagine a superpower, a giant stretching across 11 time zones armed with thousands of nuclear weapons and a massive army. Its influence reached from the icy Arctic to the warm shores of the Black Sea, and from the heart of Europe to the farthest reaches of Asia. This was a nation that inspired both awe and fear, a country whose very name was synonymous with power. This was the Soviet Union, a state built on ideology, ambition, and the promise of a better future for its people. For decades it stood as one of the two main players in the Cold War, seemingly unshakable. The world watched as the USSR and the United States faced off in a tense, high-stakes rivalry that shaped global politics, economics, and even culture. And then, almost overnight, it vanished. The unthinkable happened. A superpower simply ceased to exist. The collapse wasn't a dramatic war or revolution, it was sudden, swift, and left the world reeling. People everywhere struggled to comprehend how such a mighty force could unravel so quickly. How does a country so vast and powerful simply dissolve? That's the story we're unpacking today, a story filled with intrigue, uncertainty, and unexpected turns. The fall of the Soviet Union wasn't one event but a cascade, a domino effect of problems, reforms, and unintended consequences. Economic stagnation, political infighting, and a growing sense of disillusionment all played their part. We'll explore the long-simmering issues, the desperate reforms, and the dramatic final act when the red flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. It was a moment that marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter for millions. This is a tale of ambition, fragility, and the unstoppable desire for freedom. Across Eastern Europe and within the Soviet republics, people demanded change, risking everything for a chance at a different future. The world we know today was shaped by the events of 1991. The end of the Soviet Union sent shockwaves through every continent, altering alliances and reshaping borders. The political map was redrawn, new conflicts emerged, and the global balance of power shifted. Former Soviet states faced new challenges, from economic hardship to ethnic tensions, as they struggled to define their identities. Understanding the Soviet collapse is key to understanding today's world. The echoes of those 10 minutes still influence international relations, security, and the hopes of millions. So let's travel back in time to see how a superpower disappeared, not with a bang, but with a series of protests, reforms, and a pen stroke. The fate of a nation was sealed in boardrooms, on the streets, and in the hearts of its people. In January 1991, the USSR was still a single country. By December, it was gone. The transformation was breathtaking in its speed and scope. 15 new countries appeared, and millions woke up with new national identities. For many, it was a moment of hope. For others, a time of uncertainty and loss. The speed of the collapse is what makes it so compelling. In less than a year, a centuries-old empire unraveled, leaving the world forever changed. To understand how we got there, let's rewind the clock. Let's uncover the hidden forces, the pivotal moments, and the human stories behind the 10 minutes that shook the world. The USSR was born from the chaos of World War I and the Russian Revolution of 1917. Led by Lenin's Bolsheviks, it aimed to create a classless, communist society, radically different from the capitalist West. Formed in 1922, it united 15 republics under Moscow's control, with the Communist Party holding absolute power. The state controlled jobs, housing, and movement, creating a highly centralized, authoritarian system. Under Stalin, dissent was crushed and millions perished in the Gulag, but the USSR became a global superpower, industrializing rapidly and defeating Nazi Germany. The Cold War rivalry with the US defined global politics for decades, as the USSR projected its influence worldwide. For many, it promised equality and justice, but the reality was often grim and repressive. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was in deep trouble. The centrally planned economy was inefficient, good at building tanks but terrible at providing basic goods. Store shelves were empty, quality was poor, and the economy had stopped growing. The system discouraged innovation. People joked, "They pretend to pay us, we pretend to work." Politically, an aging leadership clung to power, stifling new ideas. Censorship and the KGB suppressed dissent, but resentment simmered, especially among the young and intellectuals. Nationalist sentiment grew among the USSR's many ethnic groups who resented Russian dominance. Soviet propaganda celebrated unity, but many republics held on to their own identities. As the economy faltered, these suppressed nationalisms re-emerged, threatening to pull the Union apart. The stage was set for crisis. Two disasters in the 1980s accelerated the Soviet collapse. First, the war in Afghanistan, intended as a quick intervention, became a costly, demoralizing quagmire, draining resources and shattering public trust. Thousands of soldiers died, and the war's brutality exposed the government's failures. Then, in 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster struck. The government's instinct was secrecy, delaying evacuations and exposing thousands to radiation. The cover-up revealed the system's incompetence and disregard for its people. Chernobyl became a symbol of decay and moral bankruptcy. Faith in the government was shattered. The disasters highlighted the urgent need for openness and reform. The Soviet system's weaknesses were now impossible to ignore. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev rose to power as the new leader of the Soviet Union, determined to save the crumbling superpower through bold and unprecedented reform. He recognized that the old ways were failing, and that only dramatic change could prevent collapse. Gorbachev launched perestroika, or restructuring, a sweeping initiative to revive the stagnant Soviet economy. He introduced limited market elements, encouraged innovation, and gave factories more autonomy to make decisions, hoping to boost productivity and efficiency. For the first time in decades, small private businesses were allowed to operate, challenging the strict communist doctrine that had dominated Soviet life for generations. This was a radical shift, sparking both hope and uncertainty. Alongside economic reform, Gorbachev introduced glasnost, or openness. This policy loosened censorship, allowing citizens to engage in public debate and openly criticize the government, something previously unthinkable. Suddenly, banned books were published, political prisoners were released, and the media began exposing the government's past crimes and mistakes. The truth, long hidden, was now coming to light. Gorbachev hoped these sweeping reforms would strengthen socialism, restore faith in the system, and modernize the Soviet Union for a new era. But opening up debate and loosening control unleashed powerful forces he could not contain. People began to demand more than just reform. They wanted real change. Glasnost gave voice to long-suppressed grievances and fueled nationalist movements among the USSR's many ethnic groups, who now rallied for autonomy and independence. Instead of renewing the USSR, the reforms exposed its deep flaws, economic hardship, corruption, and a crumbling infrastructure that could no longer be ignored. Gorbachev's gamble was massive, and the consequences were unpredictable. He found himself facing a tidal wave of unrest and uncertainty. The very system he tried to save was now unraveling before his eyes, as old symbols of Soviet power began to disappear. The forces of change, once unleashed, proved unstoppable. The Soviet Union would never be the same again. Gorbachev's reforms backfired. Perestroika created chaos. Central planning was dismantled, but no real market system replaced it, leading to worse shortages and frustration. Glasnost unleashed a flood of criticism, exposing corruption, past crimes, and the failures of the Communist Party. Nationalist movements surged, with republics like Lithuania and Ukraine demanding independence. Gorbachev was trapped, unwilling to use force, but unable to stop the unraveling. The Communist Party's grip weakened as multi-candidate elections brought reformers like Boris Yeltsin to power. Yeltsin, once an ally, became Gorbachev's chief rival, pushing for faster change. Gorbachev faced attacks from hardliners and radicals alike. The center could no longer hold. The Soviet Union was coming apart at the seams. The crisis was reaching its breaking point. By the summer of 1991, the Soviet Union was teetering on the edge of collapse. The economy was in shambles, store shelves were empty, and the people's faith in the government was fading fast. Tensions simmered in the streets as uncertainty gripped the nation. Sensing their grip on power slipping away, a group of hardline communists staged a dramatic coup while President Gorbachev was vacationing in Crimea. They declared a state of emergency on national television, hoping to turn back the tide of reform and restore strict control. Tanks and armored vehicles thundered into Moscow, their presence meant to intimidate, but the coup leaders failed to arrest key reformers, and their actions were disorganized and hesitant, undermining their authority from the start. Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Republic, emerged as the symbol of resistance. In a moment that would become iconic, he climbed atop a tank outside the Russian parliament, rallying the people and urging them to stand firm against the coup. Inspired by Yeltsin's defiance, thousands of ordinary citizens poured into the streets, forming human barricades to block the military. Many soldiers, unwilling to turn their weapons on their fellow citizens, refused to follow orders, further weakening the coup. After 3 tense and uncertain days, the coup unraveled. Crowds celebrated as the plotters surrendered and barricades were dismantled. Gorbachev returned to Moscow, but the ordeal had left him politically weakened and his authority in tatters. The Communist Party, once the unchallenged center of power, was now discredited. Calls for independence and reform grew louder across the republics. One by one, the Soviet republics began to declare their independence, breaking away from Moscow's control and charting their own futures. The central government, paralyzed and ineffective, could do little to stop the unraveling. Confusion and uncertainty reigned in the halls of power. The Soviet Union was dissolving before everyone's eyes, its collapse broadcast to the world in real time. For millions, the end was now inevitable. The red flag was lowered, and a chapter in world history was closing. The final act of the Soviet Union was about to begin, as leaders gathered to sign the agreements that would officially dissolve the once mighty superpower. After the failed coup, the USSR was a hollow shell. Real power shifted to the republics, especially Boris Yeltsin in Russia. Yeltsin banned the Communist Party and seized its assets, sidelining Gorbachev. In December 1991, leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus met and declared the USSR dissolved, forming the Commonwealth of Independent States. Gorbachev was bypassed. The union was finished. On December 25, Gorbachev resigned, and the Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. 15 new countries emerged: Russia, Ukraine, the Baltics, Central Asian republics, and more. The Cold War was over. The world map was redrawn. The end came not with war, but with signatures and a lowered flag. A superpower had vanished. The collapse brought chaos and uncertainty to the 15 new nations. Russia's 1990s were marked by economic turmoil, inequality, and the rise of oligarchs. The Baltic states turned to the west, joining NATO and the EU. Other republics faced Russian interference, internal conflict, or authoritarian rule. Ethnic and territorial conflicts erupted, from Chechnya to Nagorno-Karabakh. Globally, the end of the Cold War brought hope, but also new instability. A resurgent Russia under Putin has reignited tensions with the West. The legacy of 1991 shapes today's world. From Ukraine's independence to NATO's expansion, the Soviet collapse is a lesson in how quickly history can turn, and how fragile even the mightiest empires can be. Understanding this story is key to understanding our world today.